Hi, we are part of the Natural Area Volunteers group, and this is our team. So we're a group of 7. What we all have in common is either a concentration or a major in sustainable development, and our project managers are Tala and Chris. So the purpose of the Capstone workshop is that it centers around the client. So it helps us to integrate the curriculum that we've been learning in our classes for these 3 or 4 years and apply it towards a problem to help solve with the client, not for the client, but kind of in conjunction with the client. And through this whole process, we have to serve as consultants and really understand the constraints that these types of organizations face before offering our objective solution. So our client is the Natural Areas Volunteer Program, which is a subset that's managed by the NYC Parks Department. The goal is to help establish New York City as a primary destination for volunteerism that's environmentally focused. And the mission of NAV is to restore and protect these natural areas within New York City through volunteerism and training. And this mission includes identifying invasive species, removing the invasive species, but also just general restoration techniques. Now, the mission of NAV is not currently being fully met because there's a problem with recruitment and retention. For example, in 2012, they had 117 stewards that were volunteering with the program. And NAV has a recommended 12 hours of volunteer hours per person. But actually, out of those 117 people, only 14 people completed those 12 hours, and only 40 people completed 2 hours, which means that everybody else did less than 2 hours of volunteer. So there's a limited recruitment strategy, limited implementation practices, and limited expansion goals. And also, they really highlighted a minimal engagement from locals around the parks, and they really wanted to have us focus on the people who live in the areas where they're focusing on. For retention, they have minimal retention of long-term dedicated volunteers, mainly because they have an unfocused volunteer management system, and that probably stems from their lack of communication structures, both internally and externally within the program. So on our first meeting with our client, we were handed a survey that was done in June of 2012 with a sample size of 69 people. And one of the things that was on there was the demographics of the current volunteers. As you can see, students take up about 35% of the demographics, followed by the other employment sectors. And we focused on these 3 just because we saw potential with organizations as well as students. So students, we saw an opportunity to capitalize on just the willingness to be engaged in hands-on group project work. For organizations, NAV really wanted to focus on connecting corporations with maybe one-time work days, but also we wanted to incorporate their vision to include more engagement from locals surrounding the parks. Another thing found in that original survey was how people heard about the program, and this is where we saw our biggest problem, because as you can see, email mailing list is the highest, and rightfully so, because that's what their strategy was beforehand, and social media is at the lowest end of the spectrum, and that's because it's not a focus or priority right now. We saw this as a problem because social media has many advantages. So minimal costs, the communication possibilities are endless, which would really help to address those communication problems that we identified in our problems. And also it's a platform that many age groups can use daily. It's not just a platform for students anymore. A lot of people are now using it. So we're going to expand the social media, spearhead an advertising campaign, solidify the branding of the project. We created a new logo. We did a bunch of stuff that we'll tell you about, and just encourage outreach from volunteers to potential volunteers. So to begin addressing these problems, we just decided to do some background research, some case studies. We have 11 of them listed in our final report, but we just detailed 2 of them here. Each one of them has a summary with an analysis and key takeaways for each one. The first one was with a nonprofit called Volunteer for Long Island, and this is actually a really recent case study. It was right after Hurricane Sandy. They were looking to put together packages for individuals who were affected by the hurricane for Thanksgiving Day. And the problem was that they didn't have enough volunteers, which is very similar to the NAV program. So they launched a Twitter account, even though they already had a Facebook page, and a YouTube video from another volunteer initiative they did back in 2008. And then they used this website. It's called wefollow.com. And they use this as a tool to find other people with similar interests. What they ended up doing is they found this group of people called the Long Island Tweet Up, which basically is a group that meets, finds need within their community, and goes and helps out as a group. So through this website, Volunteer for Long Island was able to find the Long Island Tweet Up, and they were able to directly message them with tweets about the event. So they found that people began retweeting the tweets, and then this drove more traffic to the Facebook page. There were more fans on Facebook within hours, and they received messages from potential volunteers, and they were able to ultimately reach their target volunteers. So through this website, we saw as an opportunity for a takeaway to be used as a tool to reach other people with similar interests. Our second case study that we're going to talk about here is in the Oakland City Parks. There was a supervisor who was originally just responsible for 1 rose garden, but because of budget cuts, she found herself responsible for an additional 12 sites. And this clearly became a management problem, so what she did was she created her own website so that people could log their own volunteer hours, so she would no longer be in charge of that aspect of it, so she can focus her time on other things. And she had people log in a very transparent way, which actually fostered competition within the volunteers to try to outdo each other with volunteer hours. And she used this in combination with the rest of her existing social media presence. And the results were amazing. She found that she was able to raise more money just by showing different organizations, the city council, that people were interested in actually volunteering their time. Also, people responded well to the social media and actually met her at the parks, where she said that she would be on Facebook or on Twitter or things like that. Now, because of this website, she's able to run over 100 different sites, and this website is actually available nationwide for free. So our key takeaway is maybe NAV can use this website. It's a very easy creation of an account, and it might be able to address some of the problems that NAV has. So next we started to go into our strategy overview and deliverables. So we broke it up into the same categories that we divided the problem into. So recruitment and retention. For recruitment, we created a marketing internship program. We also created step-by-step guides for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now, the reason why we didn't create actual accounts was because we had meetings with the media and IT department within the parks department, and it was found that they didn't want to separate the NYC parks from the NAV program just yet, but there was some promise for the potential for this decision to be taken away in the future. So we created just these step-by-step guides just to give the program managers some idea of familiarity with these tools, how to use them, how to create them, and just guides for how to manage the pages once they're up and running. Next, we created a promotional video, and we provided a list of potential partners where they can either draw volunteer activity from or just partner with future events. And lastly, we created a volunteer survey just to get another feel for their current volunteers. So for the marketing internship program, we drafted a notice that will be advertised in either Lionshare or through the Sustainable Development internship emails. And it's just a 15-hour per week internship that manages the social media presence when and if that ever occurs. But just generally beyond that, connecting corporate groups and the community partners to volunteer days, and to just distribute regular marketing material. So our step-by-step guide for Facebook is personalized to the needs of NAV and the NYC parks. But ultimately, we have this vision to create a place where volunteers can post questions, comments, interact with program staff, get information about training and planting, and all of these things are included in our deliverable, which is the step-by-step guide. We just did a little snippet of what it looks like. This is a screenshot of our actual step-by-step guide in our appendix. But we've made it very clear of how to add content to a Facebook page, how to create a Facebook page, when to create posts, how to do this, and what it looks like at the end. We did the same thing for Twitter. So we explained that Twitter is a different space with kind of a different purpose, but it's all part of the same social media presence where volunteers can connect to program initiatives, stay engaged with maybe random facts or receive news on work days or where people are going to be. And actually in our step-by-step guide for Twitter, we have custom hashtags just so that NAV can begin to control the conversations that people are having with them on social media. This is just another example snippet from our step-by-step guide. Now, Instagram we see as a completely awesome opportunity, to put it lightly, just because it'll help to create a visual representation of the program, which we feel is really important because we want people to be able to come to a place where they can just easily see what it looks like to be a volunteer in the NAV program. So we have ideas in our step-by-step guide for photo ops, for weekly photo contests, for just putting up photos every once in a while of people doing different things with the NAV program. So this could be a really cool part of their social media presence. This is just, again, another snapshot of how we walk them through step-by-step in the guide. Same deal with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is more geared towards organizations and professional pages. So we saw this as a way to target the organizations and the one-time work days that they really wanted to focus on. So once again, we created a guide for them. So we also wanted to create a new logo. This slide doesn't do it justice because you don't see the before and then the after, but it's pretty cool. So as you can see, we keep the same color scheme, or relatively the same color scheme. We wanted to have our new logo resemble the park's logo just because we felt it was important to convey the connection between the two. But at the same time, we really wanted to create a clean, fresh NAV rebranding. So this is our proposed new logo, and we can't wait to hear our feedback from our client on Wednesday. So for our promotional video, we actually have the promotional video, but because of speakers, the situation, it's hard to play it, so I'll just tell you about it. It has an inspiring program overview. We really wanted to convey the importance and motivate people to want to volunteer, as well as just tell them what the program is, inform them how they can get involved. In order to get the footage for it, we attended a volunteer site. We filmed staff during the workday. We got some advice from people. We heard people's opinions. And then this video will actually eventually be integrated with a new social media presence. This was just an example of a promotional video that we looked at for inspiration, for our own inspiration. It was done by the British Columbia Parks. What we kept the same was the fact that they really conveyed a message of not only helping with the Parks Department, but how the Parks Department and volunteering with them actually helped them to fulfill their own goals. So we tried to convey that same message in our video, but ours is definitely shorter. This one's about 4.5 minutes, and ours we wanted to keep very succinct and organized, so ours is only 1.5 minutes. For our volunteer survey, so we created this survey. We wanted to assess volunteer satisfaction and support. So we sent it to NAV volunteers. It was sent out to 44 people on November 29th, and then we analyzed their responses. It was broken into all the categories that we felt would be beneficial for NAV to get some more information on. Staff, the level of recognition that people are getting, communication and support, all these categories. And although our sample size was small, we only had 8 respondents, we were able to notice some very clear trends just from the beginning. So one of the trends was in recruitment. So people thought that they could recruit friends. That's this big chunk. But this big chunk says that they have not already. Sorry. So we just saw this as an opportunity to capitalize on this imbalance, basically. So we thought that it would be helpful for NAV to know that they can provide tools for grassroots recruitment. People are willing to recruit just on their own terms. So if they're provided the right tools, we see this as a very low-cost way of increasing retention. For commitment, a lot of people, as you can see from these graphs, felt that they could almost commit more time and that they want to be more active in the NAV program. Now, granted, the people who are answering this survey are probably self-selected for the most dedicated volunteers, but still, if the most dedicated volunteers want to commit more time, maybe NAV should focus more energy on giving opportunities for these people for more time instead of just focusing on the people who don't want to be involved, who don't really want to give that time. Another deliverable we presented was just a list of partnerships. Now, these organizations are just a few of the ones that we focused on. In our final deliverable section, in our final report, we have the names, the descriptions, and contact information so that they can link up with these partnerships in the future. But also, we just came up with, through research, we came up with a bunch of NGOs and little organizations in and around the specific parks of focus. So these are also included in that contact information and that list at the end. So that basically concludes our whole deliverable section, but we just wanted to emphasize what this taught us about sustainable development, just going through this process. So number one, the connection between parks and sustainable development is pretty obvious. Parks create an awareness or connection to our environment, and volunteerism is the first step towards developing sustainable practices and habits if you're more connected with the environment. But also, we ran into a lot of roadblocks along the way. We had the media and IT department shut us down. We had a lot of brainstorming ideas that we thought were really cool that maybe wouldn't work in practice for a number of different reasons. And what we had to do is we had to come together afterwards, work around those roadblocks, and actually come to a solution that would work for everybody. So we thought that this was really relevant to our studies in sustainable development. So assuming that a next team is selected for this same project next semester, we see them organizing some sort of an organizational workday with Columbia students. So there are clubs here that are already focused on volunteering and connecting with the community, and we think that we can dig into those people. But also just to invest more time in working with the New York City IT department within the parks. We really feel, and still do feel, that a social media presence separate from parks would be so beneficial to this program. And we actually provided some materials in our final report for how to fight against this internal bureaucracy that prevents them from doing so. But also, just like as a final recommendation, just maybe to focus a little bit more on face-to-face recruiting, just because this is such a personable volunteer activity that maybe instead of social media might not be the only option and it might not be the end-all be-all, but if you combine this with like actual relationships and face-to-face recruitment, we see this program going really far. Are there any questions?
What was the goal for recruitment when you began the project? You talked about how many volunteers they had, but what was the...
Right, they actually hadn't set any future goals for recruiting numbers. They kind of were not actively recruiting either. They had a small presence on the Parks Department website with their contact information, but no outreach at all aside from that. Any other questions?
Did you think about or include in your report what a social media strategy would look like if you're not able to separate out NAV from the New York City parks?
I mean, I feel like social media is kind of they could do it, I guess, on their own terms, as in they call them navigators, or the stewards could they themselves could create their own Facebook events or conversations, but that's kind of up to them and us as stewards. So I guess it'd be a suggestion that we could give them, but I feel like they aren't too well versed in social media, so I think it's even difficult for them to have that conversation. So we kind of try to give them models or suggestions for what theirs would look like, and I guess we could maybe have a conversation with them about how to go about doing that as well.
What we really tried to do was kind of demystify social media for this group. They really weren't, like Ish was saying, they weren't well versed in how to create it, how to use it, how to take advantage of it. So part of this process was also just trying to teach what it could do for them, so that they could also utilize the New York City Parks page if they wanted to.
You had a lot of volunteers who you said were sort of doing less than 2 hours on a regular basis. I'm just curious, was there any capacity to reach out to those people and find out why they done? Was it just that they hadn't been asked to do more, or what?
Well, we tried to. We went to a Workday site, and there were no volunteers there, which just kind of highlights the problem. We also had the survey sent out to everybody, and like I said, we received less than 25% of a response rate. So it's almost as if we tried all the avenues that we had access to, but it's definitely recommended to address those questions, and they were addressed in our survey, but like I said, they were probably self-selecting in that survey.
We did ask in the survey how many hours each volunteer had contributed in the past year, and we kind of got a spread from the responses that we got. All of them had completed 2 hours. All of the respondents. Only one of them had completed more than 6, I think. So it was kind of a spread of all the different types of volunteers. All 8 of the volunteers, though, answered that they understood that 12 hours was recommended. So.
What we had alluded to earlier in the presentation was the fact that their communication system internally is pretty disorganized, flawed. So part of our report is addressing those issues, and it's also part of the internship program, hoping that the intern might be able to revitalize this communication system, and hopefully that will remedy the volunteerism issues as well. Thank you.
Thanks.